1986, James Cameron follows up Ridley Scott's 1979 Alien with his sequel continuation film Aliens. Sigourney Weaver returns. What say you, Rick?
Whenever you create a sequel, um, it's always a matter of diminishing returns. It's a matter of creating something, especially a sequel to an acknowledged masterpiece, which I think in '86, Ridley Scott's original film was considered a masterpiece. It's really difficult to go back 30 some odd years to determine what a thing was, what the mindset of the time was, what the attitudes were. But I believe that Scott's film at that point was considered a masterpiece, and it was one of the first times that I went to a movie. I must have been about maybe I guess I must have been about 11 years old, and the old man took me to this movie, and he was excited, and I'd never really seen my dad excited about a movie, but it would start to register later on the importance of this film, and I mean, relative to how important movies are and how important they can be, but it was a huge step. James Cameron, up until that point, was pretty much an unknown. He had directed a film called Piranha to the Spawning. He had worked with Roger Corman's American International Pictures, and he had just written and directed the the Schwarzenegger star making film, The Terminator. Schwarzenegger had already done Conan, but this was the film that really gave Cameron, it gave the world Arnold Schwarzenegger basically, and it gave Cameron the opportunity to really showcase what he could do on a small budget. Now with Aliens, it would have been foolish, I believe, for James Cameron to try to match or surpass the original. As we discussed last week, my opinion is that film is a Ten Little Indians haunted house kind of effort, and it excels. It's incredible. The nuance, the production design, the tension, the power of that film, plus the the creation of this, what would you call it, the last girl, in Sigourney.
Yeah.
I don't want to diminish it, but that's typically what that
Yeah, these are
character,
tropes.
yeah, the trope that it's considered. Now, Cameron would do would do a couple of things that would make it possibly a disaster and an embarrassment, making it much bigger, louder, and more of a roller coaster ride. But with the skill that he brought to the film, he did something that I can't say that the sequel equals Ridley Scott's film. Like I said last week, one of these films is a masterpiece, and one of these films is a great goddamn time. One that maybe I enjoy a little bit more. The experience, it's weird. One I enjoy as a masterpiece of tension and heart stopping fear, and the other one is just a goddamn roller coaster ride of fun, excitement, danger, and tension to a degree. It's not too difficult to figure out which is which, but the sequel, the added S, is just that, a bigger, louder, bolder picture with to James Cameron's benefit and his insight, a weird kind of allegory for Vietnam, which was a little over a decade behind us at that time, and shortly before the Oliver Stone, Stanley Kubrick, um, the Hollywood handling of Vietnam. So that's where we are. This second film in this now, what is it? Four, six series film, and there's a there's a third film in the prequel arriving in 2024, Alien Romulus, which will be released sometime this year. I'm not sure. Directed by Fede Alvarez, who did I think he did the Evil Dead remake. So, Mr. Chavez, how long had it been since you'd seen this film, and what was your reaction to it after being away for it for so long?
It had been a few years, and I'm trying to really go back and imagine what it would be like to recreate the experience of viewing something for the first time, which is impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And so I asked myself, how do you watch something as if it were for the first time? Because it's a whole different. I mostly watch things. If I've seen it, it's like, well, I watch it knowing that I've watched it, obviously, and I build on whatever exists there, whether it's emotionally or in my mind or whatever. You're stacking all this stuff up. We talked about Beetlejuice
Mm-hmm.
a little bit earlier, and how like on the scale of like nostalgia and childhood like interest or fascination or whatever it is versus like adult kind of an adult set of eyes or a different set of eyes or a more critical set of eyes. Sometimes the scale is not balanced, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
sometimes the weight shifts. And so it was even harder, not harder, but it was more challenging to try to watch it for the first time, but also with the added kind of element of like, what what if there had been no Alien, no Ridley Scott's 1979 version,
Mm-hmm.
what would it be like to watch this for the first time? Now that's very difficult to do after having just seen Alien again and talked about it. So, I mean, what happens? Well, if you do that, you try to watch it in isolation, but whether you do or not, kind of, I think you kind of love it for the same reasons. If you were to watch it, obviously, without seeing the first one, I think you would enjoy it. If you were to watch it after having just seen the first one, or a few days later, whatever it is, you would still enjoy it for the fact that it's not the first one. But oddly, that still to me builds the first one up more because yeah, I stylistically, thematically, this one is not as dark in every kind of variation of that word. In all of those meanings, it's not as dark as the first one, and I like the aesthetic. I like the production value of the first one. I like all of that. Here you get a great action film.
Yeah.
The first one was, the sci-fi horror thriller Trucker in Space. This is, as you described, it's Vietnam in space. This is an 80s war film. And for as good as it is, it's still a product of its time. And of course, all films are products of their time.
Mm-hmm.
But while I think this is a classic, I don't think it's as timeless as the first one.
Well, that's kind of it's. I don't think the statement that you're making is unfair. I think the reality of it is unfair. Aliens couldn't exist without the first film, and I think what's powerful about it is that Ridley Scott created such a he created characters with Dan O'Bannon and Geiler and Hill and Shusett in the writing. He created a world of regular people, honest, real people, and how they would react to a situation. James
And a real
Cameron,
android.
yeah, and a real android, yeah. But it was isolated. It was this ship. It was as we said in last week's episode, and go back to it. It's a really interesting talk. It's a really good talk about capitalism and unions and all kind of workers' rights, as well as ethical and um, ethical issues in this small space. With Cameron's film seems to open it up to a more global type of thing. Maybe that's the nature of war. Maybe that's the nature of the Marines going into a place thinking that they're the baddest motherfuckers on the planet, or in this case, baddest motherfuckers in the universe, going in to kill and take no prisoners, eradicate a species only to find themselves overwhelmed in much the same way as Vietnam proved to be. And it's really interesting for you and I to talk about this, because you and I are the generation immediately following Vietnam. So, I was
Hmm.
born 74, you were born 79, right? 78, 79, 79.
So when I mean, technically, we're of the
Yeah,
generation of the people who would have
fought.
who were born even before, who were born while the Vietnam War was happening,
Yes.
or just after.
Yeah, and but it was a game changer. It was like a real challenge to American uh, American dominance in the world. And I still don't understand that war. Right now, I'm reading a book about the Korean War, and it's fascinating to see how global politics play out for normal people, and how just regular everyday Americans get sucked into something that they have no understanding of. And I think that was one of the lessons of Vietnam, certainly of Korea, a forgotten war. But as it's dramatized in this film, you get the sense that it's very strange, because Cameron's politics, I don't know what Cameron's politics are, but I can't help um, look at a story like this from the perspective of his depiction of the Marines, their job, how they do it, but also his writing job, his hired writing job for Rambo First Blood Part 2, which I think is one of the biggest embarrassments in all of cinema. I think it's an incredible insult to the guys who fought in Vietnam. And it's a ridiculous stroking of Sylvester Stallone's ego. Um, but I can't help watch this film with a certain sensibility of what is his commentary. Is he anti-colonialism? Is he anti-military, or is he simply saying that war as a factor of human civilization is oftentimes just us overestimating our own strength and ingenuity. I mean, what?
I mean, yeah,
Yeah,
it's hard to, which is good because he's not.
yeah,
It doesn't feel like he's necessarily hitting you over the head with it, with his own personal beliefs. I mean,
hmm,
I think a lot of it is just he's, and this is why I mean it's kind of a product of its time, is because it's it's very. I don't just mean by the limitations of technology or current events or whatever else, but it's like it's of this era, that had certain sensibilities, that had certain stylistic things that were happening. I mean, if Vietnam is the subtext, um, And I mean, James Cameron is a baby boomer. Um, if you look at broadly Vietnam as this 20-year from the mid 50s to the mid 70s kind of thing, and Gen Xers who we're basically speaking to, and we ourselves are Gen Xers.
Mm-hmm.
Most of I think our audience are probably Gen Xers. Uh, I mean, that's an assumption I'm making. I'm not sure. That's an assumption based on, at least I think there are certain general stereotypical kind of attitudes that of our audience that I think share some kind of stereotypical characteristics of Gen X. So I'm stacking stereotypes upon stereotypes, but if you have like a segment of if Gen X supposedly, and this is all general again, starts from like 68 ish to 80 ish, a good portion of that is Vietnam. But you have in Aliens a testosterone fueled kind of frat boy bash war film with the high fives, the obnoxious smiles, the you mentioned Full Metal Jacket.
Mm-hmm. Platoon.
Well, you mentioned Kubrick, so yeah, and Platoon came out the same year.
Yeah.
Top Gun came out the same year.
That I didn't know. That I didn't remember.
Rambo First Blood Part 2 came out a year before.
Mm-hmm.
Full Metal Jacket would come out the year after. Predator would come out the year after. So it's very much we've got the biggest dick.
Mm-hmm.
We're the shit. Pedal to the metal. Put on the sunglasses. Everything's gonna explode. We're the fucking tough guys. In that sense, it's kind of like, well, what are Cameron's politics? Cameron's politics, at least in this film, are the politics of 80s action Hollywood films, which is like blow them up, shoot them up, biggest dick, fucking badass. Like and of course it all falls apart in this film. So, which that also is like, well, is that a commentary that the machismo looks as silly as it is? Is that because we're looking at it years later, decades later, or was it meant to look silly then because in the face of this xenomorph, their machismo gets them nowhere. So it's almost like saying, does that mean that Tarantino can say that he's a feminist supposedly because of XYZ? Can we say that just because you have female versus female badass at the end of this film, that's a feminist statement? No, I mean, it's just another trope at this point.
Yeah, but it's also a feminist statement filtered through a male lens and a male,
Of
So this
course,
is
that's what I'm
always
saying.
Yeah.
Like, it's just kind of like you can kind of tag whatever you want on it if you pull. You know what I mean? Like, there are definite tropes in this film. If you look at Cameron's Avatar, which we have,
Yeah, we have.
what is that? How does that deal with what kind of statement is that on colonialism? Was he making a conscious statement, or is it just fucking like, hey, I'm writing this story, I think it's a good story, even if it's not an original story? I mean, it's a plot line that's been done, variations of it have been done before. Is he saying, hey, this is a good fucking story, I think I can make it into a good film, a great film, according, he's going to think it's a great film regardless of whatever anyone else thinks. I can make it into this great film, use the latest technology, Um, and I'm a storyteller. That is a different perspective than someone saying like, I'm gonna do this fucking thesis film about like feminine self determination in military spaces in space. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that. I don't think that he's necessarily coming from that perspective. I think he's like, I just want to make fucking cool movies. Um, if he is coming from a perspective from these like different, if his politics are going into it, either he kind of mixes it well with the tropes and the counter tropes, or it's just seeping out. You know what I mean?
It's always a questionable thing. It's like, what he's not a vocally political filmmaker, so I've never heard him say anything. But watching it in this manner and listening to him talk and knowing the connection to Vietnam, knowing his generation and his age and what he might have thought of Vietnam, it's hard not to read into that. But that's what we do. It's like, you watch them, and this is one of the fascinating things about movie watching is that first watch you're pulled into a story. You go along for the ride. You the ups and the downs and the excitement. After you know where the story's going, you know where the scares are. The next few viewings, if you're going to go back to a movie, which this is a movie that I do go back to, you watch it in a different perspective. You see different things. You put you instill in the story and the films whatever knowledge that you have, which may be intentional from the filmmakers, or it might be unintentional, or it might be subconsciously there from the filmmaker's point of view. I don't know. That's what I find fascinating is that there's no there's no dead on reading of a film. There are so many
Sure. There are
variants.
multiple
Yeah,
readings.
there's
Yeah.
multiple readings, and to think this is part of the failure of the auteur theory. Although the auteur theory, I'm a big believer in the auteur theory. For we have to do an episode on that just to talk about our own impressions and our own interpretations of that. But you have a director with an attitude and a mindset of what's trying to be of a story that's trying to be put across, but you also have actors that are interpreting that. You have a producer who has their agenda. You have studio heads, production designs, and this film is really interesting because it's Cameron, not an American but a Canadian American director, unknown at this time, not the James Cameron that we know today, not the fucking megalomaniacal um, machine that he is now after Terminator, True Lies, Avatar, and it's really interesting because he hasn't made that many movies. He's
I mean, Titanic also.
Titanic, The Abyss, but it's like he certainly no he certainly no Spielberg in lengthy filmography. Scorsese, he's not like that. I mean, I don't know if he's made 10 films, you know, but he is an innovator, and movies as we know them today are vastly different because of what he did with this film, with Terminator 2 3 or 4 years later, with Avatar after that. I mean, you would be a
Mm.
fool to imagine that you would be a fool not to recognize James Cameron's fucking footprints all over cinema.
So, what are those footprints?
Well, definitely the emergence of CGI, and people would say that was born out of Terminator, but no, that was born out of the Abyss, with this liquid alien or this liquid being that was created in that. The first time I think it was probably the first time that you had a truly successful CGI character rendered on film. I might be wrong with this, but I think it was the first time that it was fully, and water is notoriously difficult to create in CGI. So the man had huge balls to take on a movie like that, or at least to even come up with a concept, write a script, and then create it. So you've seen The Abyss, correct?
Long ago. I don't really remember it.
Okay, so The Abyss is that first step. The Abyss made
Who's in it?
Ed Harris, Mary Elizabeth Mastriani, Michael Biehn is the villain, and I can't remember the supporting cast from there, but I remember Ed Harris. And Ed Harris,
Okay.
it was such a horrible experience that Ed Harris, to this day, 30 years later, refuses to talk about it.
Really?
Yeah, there's a degree of PTSD from that experience, and if you know the stories of Ed Harris is not someone to back down. Ed Harris is not someone to. You can see Ed Harris going at a director, choking a director to death. Ed Harris is fucking nuts. That's why I love watching Ed Harris. I think he's a phenomenal actor, and to know that he broke down in tears during the making of that film, I would love to hear the backstory of that. I just know that James Cameron pushed him to the limit and almost killed him a couple of times during the making of that film. But the technological advances made, the technological bursts that were made in that film made possible the T-1000, the Robert Patrick character in Terminator 2.
T2.
Yeah. Which is The Abyss. I don't think it died at the box office, but I think it barely recouped its budget. Terminator 2, on the other hand, was such a fucking phenomenal hit that it changed the game, and it closed out the 1990s, and the 90s was the decade that was a consistent battle between Schwarzenegger and Stallone. Stallone with Rambo, First Blood, Schwarzenegger with Commando, and then Predator, jungle films, that kind of thing. Just ridiculous
You're
kind
talking
of.
about the 80s.
I'm talking about the 80s, yes. Talking about the 80s that it conquered. And then Stallone with Rocky, Schwarzenegger with Conan, until ultimately you would have Schwarzenegger closing it out with Terminator 2, which is by far one of the greatest cinematic achievements of the century. I mean, just the advancements in that film, going from CGI through the Stan Winston work, and it was in a weird way, it was the last hurrah for guys like Stan Winston and Rick Baker. But the power of what they did during that decade, between between Rick Baker's American Werewolf in London, Stan Winston's work on Aliens, and then his work on the Terminator, it made the 80s. It made that decade, and I'm very critical of the 80s. I'm kind of disgusted by the 80s because it's a period that action films in the 1980s were like pornography. They attacked a certain element of your brain, and they lit up those receptors, and they got those dopamines flowing where maybe they weren't deserved. Commando is not a good movie. I don't give a shit what anybody says, but it's a fun time. Rambo First Blood Part 2 is a horrible movie. Rambo First Blood Part 3 is a fucking embarrassment. Um, you know, I'm a fan of the first film, but after that, it's just fucking embarrassment after embarrassment. With Terminator 2, I think you went into something that was a little bit more telling of the culture, a little bit more of a forewarning, and warnings that have never been heeded. If you look at the power of computers and AI and technology as it exists today, but that's an episode that we're going to do at another time when we get into AI. 1986 and Aliens was a coming together. It was probably it's not one of the last, but I think it was the peak and best example of everything that practical filmmaking could be. And for people who know what that means, that basically means no CGI. There's no CGI work in this film. This is all practical. This is model work, miniatures, rear projection. This is force perspective. There's this. They even use old-fashioned fucking mirrors to give the illusion of greater scale. This film is trickery at its fucking best, and it's a testament to James Cameron's training. What you can't take away from James Cameron is James Cameron is
Of
a true
course.
filmmaker. You can argue, as we have, as I have. I shit on Avatar, and Titanic is, I think, embarrassing story wise. But when that ship starts going down, holy fuck, it's exciting. And I've only
That's
seen
true.
it
Yeah,
once.
and I
I've only,
resisted.
yeah,
Right. Yeah, exactly. I
yeah,
resisted that movie because I thought it was cool.
yeah.
Um,
I I resisted that movie until I went out with this chick that I was in love with. That it was the most ridiculous relationship, and she told me, "Yeah, let's go see a movie, anything but Titanic." And as soon as I heard that, I said, "Nope, we're gonna go see Titanic," because I wanted to punish her. I punished
and that
myself.
ship
Yeah,
sank.
yeah.
Nice.
Oh, that ship, it took a long time for that motherfucker to go down, but it eventually did. And not in
But
the
that
good
played
way.
on.
Not in a good way. So,
I wanted to punish her.
I wanted to punish her so fucking
She
badly.
wanted you to take her to see Titanic, and she fucking tricked you. That's what happened.
Maybe that is it. You know what? She was a devious bitch. But
Not
going
the
back,
briar patch.
no, oh yeah, Brer Rabbit. Um, the fact of the matter is that James Cameron, for whatever he lacks in obvious storytelling skills, very just lack of insight, he makes up for it with spectacle. But it's not spectacle in the way Michael. You know what? You know what would be a good episode would be a comparison of James Cameron versus Michael Bay, because I think
Okay.
Michael Bay is completely soulless. I think I've never seen anything that Michael Bay has done where I said that's a good movie. I would say that's technically good right there. That's well made, but it's always so self-conscious with very strange. I've never thought about this until right now. James Cameron's films do not seem self-conscious to me. They do seem like they're telling a story, and a story that he's dedicated to, but he doesn't seem like he's trying to. He does seem like he's trying to overwhelm an audience and make them. He wants a reaction, and he wants the reaction that he's getting, but it does serve the story that he's telling. And Aliens does that. Aliens is incredible because it's bigger, it's bolder, and it's a completely different movie. It's Chainsaw 2. I can't go back to what was because that was a
Right.
masterpiece. But I can make it ridiculous. Hooper knew that. Toby Hooper knew that in making Chainsaw 2. I think Cameron knew the same thing and said, well, let's make it a war movie. and he took something that he was fascinated with, infantry in the future, and what that would mean. And I think it's very, what I think works about it is you you kind of like to see somebody get their comeuppance. I'm not rooting against the Marines in this film, but there are moments when I'm thinking to myself, you motherfuckers have no idea what you're going
Yes.
up against.
Yes.
And that I
Exactly.
like that.
Yeah.
In a weird way, I'm rooting for the aliens in that way.
Well, right.
Hmm.
Up until to a point. Yeah,
Yes.
because you want the big. It becomes kind of like it's like professional wrestling.
Yeah.
Like you have an idea of who you want to go up against Hulk Hogan at the end.
Yeah.
Um, and and again, we're in the 80s. Um,
If
so
there was
it's like
ever, if there ever was a symbol of 1980s consumerism, Hulk Hogan would be it. Absolutely. Eat your vitamins, Hulkamaniacs,
yeah, say your
in my
prayers,
Randy
all that,
Macho Man
and
voice.
oh yeah,
Oh, yeah.
and so you have this idea of like, well, I want, let's say it's the Ultimate Warrior. And
Yeah.
so at that point, I don't even know if the year's 90, 89, 91 at this point. The nerds will know.
Hmm.
Um, and, and, and so it's, you want, you want that. So you want this guy, let's say again, it's the Ultimate Warrior. You want him to defeat everyone so that he can go up against Hulk Hogan. And so here we have all of these obnoxious soldiers and all the tropes, all the tough black guy, the tough dyke, um, and all these tropes are very. I mean, even and I'm sidestepping now but even like the Paul Reiser,
Hmm.
I find that I believe that is a racist trope. I think
The Jew?
he's the
Is it anti-Semitic?
yeah. I mean, he's the treacherous Jewish
Yeah.
administrator.
Yeah.
He's the money hungry administrator. That is a racist trope. Um,
Yeah, but
the
his being
there
Jewish doesn't play a part of it. I mean, I know what you're saying. It's racism that it's the difference between explicit and underlying racism. Is it?
sure. I mean, yeah, it is a, that's I mean that's also like um, part of what makes it a trope is that it's like, well, if it's a robot playing that character and you can say, well, the actor is not Jewish, the character is not Jewish, the character is a robot. But you're like, yeah, but the part itself
Hmm.
is and now am I saying that that
That
I want to
Cameron?
boycott this movie
No.
and all this bullshit because of no, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that I'm calling it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like and am I saying that again that James Cameron said, okay, here we're gonna have like the treacherous Jewish money hungry villain. Um, but he's not really even the real villain because he's just like a little weasel. So he's like an accomplice. Is that what I'm going to do? I'm not saying that James Cameron is even thinking that. James Cameron might scoff at the idea that this is that because he doesn't see it or doesn't want to see it or doesn't whatever.
Hmm.
I'm saying it because I see it. And I may be right, I may be wrong, but that's what I see.
But
And I'm still going to watch the movie.
it's also a pervasive image within our culture that
Of course.
and that's the thing. It's like there's also the theory which sometimes I subscribe to, sometimes I don't. It depends on when you get me. It depends on the circumstances of of when when do we live up to the stereotype? When do we embrace
Right.
the stereotype? I mean, if you look at this film, I'm obviously as fucking Mexican American, I'm offended by the Vasquez character, not because not because it's inaccurate as what that could be. Is that I don't know if you would probably know better than I do because you speak the language and you speak it you know it better than I do. But I don't buy her as a Mexican. You know what I mean?
I mean, I didn't. What if? I mean, that opens up a lot of different questions
It
because
does
it's
open
like,
up a
well,
lot of
what does
questions.
that mean? You don't buy her as a Mex. You know what I mean? Like, what does that mean?
I
Like,
think I
um,
I hear her pronunciation of all the Spanish she throws in as off.
okay,
She
but
doesn't
like,
sound
what if
Chicana. She doesn't
someone?
sound from. She doesn't sound like a Barrio girl. She sounds like Jeanette Goldstein.
Okay, well, hey, I mean, that those are the limitations of casting, the limitations of
Especially at
Jeanette,
that
whatever
time,
her name is, didn't do her
especially
homework. I don't
well,
know,
yeah, especially
whatever, you know,
in
like.
1986. You know, I mean, it's just I
Plus,
don't know.
yeah, I mean, and plus, it's like, do you want like? There are obviously people that are like Chicano, whatever,
Hmm.
that don't speak the language.
Yeah.
Different people speak it at different levels.
Hmm.
Different people have a different pronounce. Like, you're gonna have your, especially what in those days would be called a wetback.
Hmm.
There's a joke in film
It's a
that
good
is
joke.
funny.
It's a very good joke. I don't give a fuck about it. It's a funny joke.
It is funny. Um,
I'm not offended by the joke, and I love that Bill Paxton says
where
it because it's such an asshole thing to say. I love it.
and he's so good at that.
He's great in the film. He is
He
really great in this
he's
film.
so yeah. Well, let's hold off on
Okay.
before we get fully into him. But he's so good at delivering that, and his character's so annoying he's that he becomes likable. But
Hmm.
again, I don't want to fall into him yet. But um, he's so good at delivering that line about her seeing alien. She thought it meant illegal alien, and she signed up. Um, and you know that especially in those circles,
Yeah.
people do bullshit and they do talk
Yeah.
shit to each other along those lines, and people are they're stupid. These people are they're not academics, which is not to say that anyone who isn't an academic is stupid, but these are like jarheads,
Yeah.
basically, is what I'm getting at. And so, which I'm insulting them, but the point is that like I don't watch the film and as a person who speaks Spanish and say, well, um, and what's the character's name?
Vasquez.
Okay, so even there, it's like, is the character name Vasquez? Is the character's name
Yeah.
Vasquez? Is the
Yeah.
character name Vasquez? Is the character, you know what I mean? Like,
Vasquez.
it,
Yeah.
it right.
Yeah.
Like, do I care if there's an accent on the A when
Yeah.
they write it out? You know what I mean? Like, because I happen to know that that one goes there. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I don't care at
Yeah.
that, but I personally don't care.
No, I agree with you to a degree. I agree with you to a degree, but there's also that moment where I'm like, well, this is
Well,
just
and there is. It's also just kind of like, well, in Hollywood, true to Hollywood form, it's going to be like, well, tough, and whatever decade you're in is how you describe the character. Maybe at this point it would be tough Latinx,
hmm
um, female pronouns unknown at this point, or they would add whatever the pronouns are. However you would describe it. Back then, it would be like tough Chicana soldier,
yeah,
um, whatever, and then they cast from there, or they cast against it, or however they do it. But you've got all those tropes. You've got that. You got the Bill Reiser, or whatever his name is, um, Paul Reiser. I mean,
Paul Reiser.
you've got the tough black guy. You've got
Hmm.
her as the tough like dyke,
Yeah.
right? You've got the officer with rank but with no experience. Um, you've got, here we go, Bill Paxton as the annoying guy who becomes, I'm sure he's a fan favorite, um,
Oh,
because
believe me, when you see this movie in a theater, people love him. People. He
I'm
is
sure they
comic,
do.
and he's very necessary in this film to relieve the tension. If it had just been nonstop, it might be a little bit overwhelming. You need moments of levity. You need to release that tension every once in a while. You need to open that valve and be like, okay, let's catch a breather. And it's a very important aspect of a film like that because you need moments of levity. You need to be able to laugh. You need to be able to. It can't just be all loops. You have to take that. You have to build. And I think what he does is really great in the film because for anybody who thinks this is how I would handle something, you realize what a blowhard is. You realize what a
Yeah,
bullshitter is, and it's something that if you're realistic about a situation in yourself, you can say this might be who I am at the moment. Game over, man. Put that little girl in charge. This is
right.
bullshit. I can't figure.
Right.
You know, I was almost out, man. And
Game over, man.
I love it. I remember seeing that in a movie theater, just laughing my ass off because it was like, yeah, game over, man, game over, fuck that. And
Somebody
he's
put that quote on our you know who you are.
yeah, you know who you are. Um, and that's what's so
They put that on our
wonderful
Buy Me a Coffee page.
when you
That shit jumped out at me.
when you can take these tropes, when you can take these characters, these stock characters, and I think they're stock characters because they actually exist. Because you can see them in this world, and you can relate to somebody like that. Even if it's something like your job, there's always that one guy who was talking
Right,
shit.
right.
Whoever the guy is, that between you and him, he's looking at the manager saying, I wish that motherfucker would come over here. I wish he would come over here. Fuck him. And then once the manager comes over, he's, okay, sir, yes, sir, this is, we're going to try this, we're going to do that, and as soon as he's gone, fuck that motherfucker. You know what I mean? That those
Yeah.
guys exist. And that's the Bill Paxton character. And what he does in it is fucking hilarious. I think he brings to it a certain, he makes it a lot of fun, you know? So he stands out.
And
Yeah.
he's just as that character is just as American as the fucking as the badass
Hmm.
character. Um, and traveling. If you've traveled with someone, or if you travel in a group,
Yeah.
travel in a group. I mean,
Oh,
don't travel
personalities
in a
come
group.
out.
But if
Personalities come out.
but
Yeah.
if you're traveling right, and even if like people will fall into these kind of like roles,
Yeah.
um, where because things will if you travel in a group, which I'm saying travel in a group, but also don't, um,
Your warning.
things are gonna go wrong.
Yeah.
Things will go fucking wrong. And so what happens like when you miss that third flight or that no, you miss that connector, whatever that is, and that means it's gonna set everything behind you back now because you are relying on that connection to move on to the next thing. Well, and let's say we're going days.
Yeah.
Well, somebody's gonna fucking like be that guy who's gonna be like, it's fucking game over. Like the whole vacation is ruined.
Hmm.
We're fucked. Fuck. Fuck. And then someone's invariably gonna have to tell that person to shut the fuck up
Yeah.
while we figure out how to like get back on track somehow.
Yeah. You're painting a
Um,
story I can see.
it's gonna happen.
I see
It's
in this
gonna
story. I've
happen.
seen this fucking movie. I've seen this movie play out in real fucking life, and I've heard it told to me as it's played out. So yeah, I know what the fuck you're talking about. And anybody out there knows that this shit comes from experience. I've been there. I've done that. I've been out in places where you find yourself in a situation where it's like, fuck, I'm with the wrong person right now. This is the motherfucker I should not be here with. This thing is going to go badly. But also, there's a character that's a character that sometimes will redeem himself and will come out, and that fucking last hurrah, and he dies a well-earned hero's death. I think he's like,
Yeah.
he's like, you want some? How about you want some too, motherfucker? And people are laughing their asses off at that moment because he's the blowhard that is afraid, but when it comes down to it, motherfucker comes through. He comes through, and
Right.
I love his character for that. I just Bill Paxton is one of those actors, and I had never seen Bill Paxton before this movie. I'm going all the way back to '86. I'm going back to seeing, going being in a movie theater watching this shit and laughing my ass off at this guy, thinking I would have loved to have played that part. As a kid, I would have loved to have been that guy. I would love to, to do that, and the bravado, and then you see you see the chicken shit underbelly of it, but at the end he comes through, and it's a very real relationship between him. What I like about it too is that you have Sigourney Weaver's Ripley character, who she comes back for this sequel, and there was talk of her not coming back, or they weren't able to secure her for some reason. She was protective of the character, um, and she wasn't sure she wanted to come back. And then there was a payday dispute and all this bullshit, but they got her back. I don't think that the movie would work without her.
Well,
Um,
what's the premise of the film as you make that point?
what do you mean? What's your question?
What I'm saying is, okay, I'm asking why wouldn't that work? And and we'll build it into it for people who don't fucking know
Part
this
of the
movie.
reason
Is like,
is,
what is this movie? What is it about?
well, if you just had, let's say you have Wayland Yutani, and they're still going after this fucking creature. They still want it for their weapons department. They still sit down upon there.
So what
Um,
is, yeah,
so
what
so you have these people.
the
Hmm? Basically, you have a,
pretend I'm Newt and I don't
yeah.
know anything, and I'm like, what is aliens, why is it a sequel, what happened in the first one in three sentences, and what is this one about in three sentences, so we can understand why
So
they wouldn't
yeah.
have been able to do it without her.
So the first film is about space truckers landing on a planet, encountering a heretofore never encountered species, and the way it decimates the crew. Her crew of 7 people. She's the survivor. She's the one that makes it out of it. But she goes from being one character to something completely different in a way that both adversity and um, trauma would put you through. So she becomes this different character. She goes into sleep hibernation, hoping to be discovered in a few weeks. That turns into 57 years. Her whole life has been destroyed at that point. Her daughter, who was 11 at the time of the first film and was never addressed in that film. See, I like that. I like that Cameron expanded
Yeah.
on a whole bunch of things that don't come out of nowhere, but could have realistically been there in that first film. And who knows? Maybe Sigourney Weaver in '79 had that in her mind and played it out in that performance, or maybe it didn't exist, and you're able to place it on the character for this new movie, and she plays the character from there. But you're looking at somebody whose entire life has been taken away from her. She thinks she has beat this thing, and in truth, she beat that one, but at what kind of a cost? So now you have 57 years later, she's experienced this thing. She gets called on to go back. She's very reluctant. She doesn't want to do it. She doesn't want, and why would she? But Cameron says something in, not, I don't know if it's the commentary or interviews that I've read. Her reasoning for going back is much the same as Vietnam vets signing up for another tour because they have to face it. They have to go back to it. They have to keep punching. And that's what she does. She goes back to face the fear and destroy it. And it there were points where I said to myself, why the fuck would she do this? But there
Yeah.
is an understanding of man's both curiosity and fear and need to conquer fear. So her going back into the belly of the beast is believable to me.
Yeah.
And the
Unfinished business,
yeah,
basically.
and the transformation she makes at the beginning of Aliens, she's still Ripley. She's still Ripley from that first film. But the onslaught, the experience from the first film and surviving that, plus the war nature of the second film and the onslaught and her understanding of what this thing is, toughens her in a way that I don't know if it had been a different actor, if it had been Meryl Streep, the way Meryl Streep was at one point considered for this role. If John Cazale hadn't died when he died, this might very well have been Meryl Streep. Were you aware of that?
That's crazy.
Yeah, that's fucking
I've
nuts.
heard of that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. There was at one point where it could have been Meryl Streep, but they went with this virtual unknown, basically unknown, and it's one of the great female. It's one of the great female action, definitely female roles in movies, and the fact that she does it doesn't diminish her femininity in this movie because I at one point I started to, after you walk away from a movie, you replay it in your head and you give it certain attributes that may or may not be there. And I started to imagine that she played it as very masculine. She didn't. She played it with a great deal of femininity, and her. I think it was a genius move on James Cameron's part to have her lose her daughter and adopt another
Right.
child. I mean, it seems like a very
Right.
obvious thing, but it lets
It
us see.
does.
Yeah, it is. But the nuance of her performance and the way she falls in love with this little girl and saves her, and we're going to get into why that's problematic in the third film. Because there's a lot of controversy over the way that was made. James Cameron has issues with the direction that film took. But that's for next week. This one,
Right.
it's yeah. None of that would have. If you had just had the Marines going in, you you wouldn't have a you wouldn't have the relationship to the story that we have. You wouldn't have the investment. It would just be a firefight. It would just be war. It would be no different than The Longest Day or you need somebody that for this film you need somebody who has gone through it and we can relate to from a human level. And that's why it's
Because you need the
important that they got her back.
relationships.
Yeah. Um
I mean, in Platoon, it's like um, Charlie Sheen in Charlie Sheen's Oliver Stone films, and I've said this before. I'm going to say it now,
mhm.
and I'll say it again when we do whatever. When we'll probably do Wall Street in isolation at some point.
Yeah.
Um, Charlie Sheen with Wall Street is like he's caught between the good dad and the evil dad,
Mhm.
and Charlie Sheen in and which side is he going to take, and what how does that turn out for him? In Platoon, he's torn between the good dad, and this in simplistic terms, the
Mhm.
good dad and the evil dad.
Well, those
Which
those
side does he
simplest
take, and how does that turn out for him?
some aspects of storytelling are simplistic.
Of course,
Yeah.
yeah. Guy meets
Yeah.
girl,
Mhm.
guy meets, well,
Yeah.
guy meets guy, girl meets girl, whatever. Jealousy, loses girl, blah 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 blah. Happily ever after, or they both die, um, and all the variations of that. Um, but here again, yeah, going back to the archetypes, it's like it's the relationships. What yeah, Apocalypse Now, going back to now Martin Sheen.
Hmm.
Um, it's he's on this boat with this crew of people, and slowly what's happening to them. But it's his relationship to this other father figure of in Marlon Brando. How does he um, face him, become him, whatever,
And destroy him.
Godfather,
Yeah.
and destroy him
Yeah.
so that he can ultimately become him?
Hmm.
It's all of this shit. Here it's like, well, you have this face off of not, um, as I started earlier, it's not Hulk Hogan and all the Ultimate Warrior because you were rooting for Sigourney Weaver's Hulk Hogan, but you knew that the alien was going to tear through everyone else, and the alien is Ultimate Warrior, and now they're going to face off so that Hulk Hogan can win, even though in the actual match, ultimately the Ultimate Warrior won. Even though at the time I was rooting for Hulk Hogan, and I believe he won because he got the count, but whatever. So then the referee was knocked out. Whatever.
Yeah, that seemed to happen a
Okay.
lot to referees back then.
Yeah, and I'm talking about those nerds.
Yeah.
Um,
You would think they would have figured out a way
and
to get around that.
yeah, right. Um, but that's part of the drama. That's
Yeah.
part of the thing, is so that people could argue about it after. But here we go. Here you have mother against mother.
Hmm.
You have a symbolic mother figure in Sigourney Weaver who's trying to protect her daughter, but she's also trying to protect fucking humanity and everything beyond. Um, and then you have the queen alien of this fucking colony, um, who's been torn from her like birthing fucking nest or her hatching nest or whatever because she's laying all these fucking eggs. Um, and now it's like, if you look at it from the perspective of the alien, um,
Yeah.
and going back to James Cameron's politics, is like, the most I know about his politics is that I vaguely know that he's somehow environmentally like
Hmm. Yeah.
involved or something.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that already puts him in a certain place on the scale.
Yeah. It would be very easy to
Um,
speculate Hollywood liberal. It'd be very easy.
sure. Um, yeah, but I mean, also like Teddy Roosevelt was fucking an environmentalist, but he
Yeah.
was also like
An asshole.
he was also fucking a macho, fucking
Yeah.
like all of that,
He was also an Indian killer, and yeah, he was.
And a big game hunter, and I mean, Charles Manson argued that he was an environmentalist with his fucking animals, trees, waters, air, tree, waters, animals, atwa shit. You know what I mean? Which
Yeah.
environmental terrorist and all that shit. Anyway, here you have this fucking alien species is just doing what, and as we go further into the franchise, we'll understand more about why that is. But as of right now, this thing is just there fucking, yeah, it's fucking everybody up, but it's just trying to do its thing, right?
It's just LIVIN,
Um,
baby. That's what it's doing. That's what it's done.
that's it.
And
That's it.
yeah. So
It gets older, and these humans just stay the same age.
it's crazy because Riser Burke makes sense. You know, we have a right to eradicate. We don't have a right to eradicate this species. That's true, but
Right. But
but so it's the but, and that's why if you look at it as just a species, but it's an attacking species. It's a species who's coming against us. It doesn't have a problem killing us. So it really comes
right.
down to kill or be killed. It comes down to a matter of survival and how you have to protect your own. Um, I gotta say that when you watch it, I don't know about you, but it makes me look at an anthill a little bit differently. It makes me look at um, because you see a structure there. You see a queen. You see workers. Um, Cameron's original idea was to have a number of different types of a number of different types of xenomorphs, which kind of comes out in the later films. In the third film, it seems to be like a worker alien. These are soldier aliens. There's subtle differences in each film, which is a factor of expanding the universe and I think it's reasonable. But he wanted to have aquatic xenomorphs, flying xenomorphs, multi-legged, spider-like xenomorphs. It might have been too much. I think what he captures on
Yeah,
screen
it
is
becomes
perfect.
silly after a
Yeah,
while.
and it would. It would. Then it starts going into the Tremors franchise, where it's just a. If you've ever seen, it's a lot of fun, but it's stupid. It's ridiculous. A film that I love, but by the way, but you know
Yeah, now you're into Dune,
yeah,
it's
exactly.
different.
Yeah, the once you start expanding that universe, you have to expand the possibilities of what the danger is, and I don't think it's necessary for this film. I like that Cameron was restricted to a degree, but what he did here, I think that the xenomorphs in this film exceed the xenomorph in the original film. Um,
Why?
there's a couple of moments where I think Ridley Scott chose badly in he wanted to avoid what looked like a man in a suit. Um, there's a couple of moments where the xenomorph walks across the screen, and I'm like, that looks just like a man in a suit. When it comes down from the rafters, that's cool. When it pulls out
Yeah.
of it looks cool. When they limit that aspect of it, it looks great.
Yes.
In this film, you don't see full-bodied xenomorphs walking around like men. They're crouched over. He does a lot more medium shots that obscure things, and they work better. I think they work better in this. But by the time you get to the alien queen, that's one of the greatest achievements in animatronic um, filmmaking that I've ever seen. And it stands watching it last or 2 nights ago. The tension was in the room. I was watching it with the dog on my lap, leaning forward, waking him up every couple of seconds because I forgot how fucking good it was. There's not a moment in this film where these creatures don't look realistic to me. They
Yeah.
look like
When it's
fuck. Yeah.
when it's attached to that, it has like this tube,
Hmm.
and it lays eggs through that tunnel,
Hmm.
and it's attached.
Yeah.
And once it gets se severed from that mucus tube or whatever it
Hmm.
is, that mucosal
And you can
tube,
see her struggling to
with
get away from it. Where she's ripping herself
yeah,
from
because
it.
she's like, it, she's you don't know if she's in pain,
Hmm.
or it's just this traumatic thing, right?
Yeah.
And because she's vulnerable, um, and now she's free, and now it's like, oh fuck, this is like Mama Bear type
Hmm.
of shit. And now they've done the foreshadowing with Sigourney Weaver using that cargo mover, whatever it's called.
That loader. That was the first time that I started. That was probably the first time that I started to understand foreshadowing in a movie. I
I
remember
see.
I
Okay.
remember watching it, and Ripley says, "Can I be of help?" And like, I don't know, can you be of help, right? And she says that she could do that. And you see her get into it, and you see her start to move it around. And the old man leaned over to me and said, "Pay attention. That shit's coming back later."
Yeah.
I was like 11, and I was like, I don't know what the fuck he's talking about. And what's brilliant about it is you forget about it. You forget
Right, because
completely
it's
about it
just
because, yeah,
incidental. Yeah, it's just
yeah, because you're hit with so much shit. Now, my cynicism is such that I'm like, oh yeah, that's going to come back because there's no way that they spent the money to do that and it's not going to play a part later on. You know what I mean?
It's also just understanding like the story
Yeah,
structure,
you
like
understand story. Yeah. Here's an introduction
so
of something that's going to come
yeah,
back.
so you know that like, well, at the same time, this is something that's revealing character,
Yeah.
and it's showing that okay, wow, she's earning the respect
Hmm.
finally of the soldiers and of the crew because she is one of them. She's blue collar. She's not this officer
She's not corporate.
who she's not corporate,
Yeah.
exactly. Um, but now it comes back to it, and it's like, well, this is her thing, and
Yeah.
she gets to go up against this alien um, with this. It's it's this rig, it's this machine that you stand in.
Hmm.
It's hollow, but it's kind of like a suit,
It's like a
but
skeleton.
it's like a forklift. It's like a skeleton
Yeah.
forklift, like a transformer skeleton
Hmm.
forklift that can pick up cargo, and you can walk in it as you control it, and you move things around. You pick things up and walk and place them, and that's how she fights the queen.
Let me tell you something. I, when you saw this movie, I imagine the first time you saw it was in a theater, correct?
No, I rented this movie.
Wow,
I
you've
didn't see it
never
in the
seen this
theater.
in a theater.
Uh-uh.
This is one of the great theater watching experiences. This is one of the few times that if this were playing, I would go see it in a theater. I would risk my disgust for humanity. I would go up against my disgust for humanity to see this in a theater again, because I've seen it. I saw this on a. I did an episode about this movie 6 or 7 years ago. After seeing it on a double feature, I saw Alien and then I saw Aliens at the Egyptian, and I
Mm.
was blown away. And to hear an audience where Ripley gets the attention of the Queen Mother and then goes into the utility closet, and you're like, wait, what the fuck is she gonna do? She's gonna find some kind of a weapon. She's gonna find a gun. She's gonna find a flamethrower. She's gonna launch this motherfucker into space. You just don't know what the hell she's gonna do. And that door open. She's about to get nuked. The fucking moments are beat by beat obvious.
Yeah,
It's so fucking, and this is the beauty of being able to play that note and to play that song. And you can't take away from Cameron as an action director. He knows how to lay that shit down. And when that door opens and you see those legs come out, you hear that sound, you hear that transformer
right.
sound, and it pans up to her, and you hear, "Get away from her, you bitch."
Yep.
You will never hear an audience lose their shit like in that moment. That is one of the great audience moments that you can have watching a movie. And I remember it in 86. I remember people were losing their mind, jumping out of their seats. They were just cheering because it was a payoff unlike anything else that you had seen. You weren't prepared for it. You knew, now we're going to see some fucking chingazos. We're going to see some crazy shit, and it lives up to it. I mean, you have that moment where you think, okay, they've escaped, but this thing has got to be coming back. And
Right.
for the tail to shoot through Bishop's body in the way it does. And it's crazy because up until this point, you don't know what to think of Bishop.
Yeah,
You
Lance
have the
Hendrickson.
Yeah, you have the bad taste of Ian Holmes' ash in your mouth. You remember that. If you remember that first
And
film.
so does Sigourney Weaver's Ripley.
Exactly.
So now
And
you have yeah,
yeah,
go ahead.
it informs that. You can't get away from it. You're wondering, is he a bad guy? And Henriksen plays it with such delicacy. He plays it like a 12-year-old boy. Henriksen in his description of how he approached the character, he was like, if you come from an abusive childhood, like he did, somewhat abusive, you kind of grow this attitude where you approach people like, well, fuck them. I'm going to outlive them anyway. That's what he said. I feel sorry for these people because I'm going to outlive them anyway. And that's the way he approached Bishop. So you don't know what to expect from him. You know that he's from the company. You know he could be programmed to act in the same way that Ash did. And there are hints to that maybe he is. When he talks about Burke, but there's a sensitivity to the performance. There's a Pinocchio quality to Ash to Hendrickson's performance, so that when he does arrive to save the day and get Ripley and Newt off of that platform, you're like, okay, now I can finally sell out to him. I can finally feel comfortable
Yeah,
knowing that he's okay.
yeah.
And when
Because
that,
earlier he
yeah,
had already.
hmm
Go ahead.
no, earlier he had already what?
He had already volunteered to crawl
Hmm.
um, through that tube,
Yeah.
um, through that shaft. But interestingly, in this case, in the previous film, the corporate entity is the corporate android. Um, in this film, the corporate entity and the android are two different
Hmm.
characters. Paul Reiser's character is the corporate
Yeah.
entity, the metaphorical android,
Yeah.
but he's not even that because he is actually looking out for himself because he wants the big payday. And in this case, the Lance Hendrickson android is benevolent and altruistic. That's actually what he is altruistic.
Hmm.
He's willing to sacrifice himself for others. And it almost feels like not only is he programmed that way, but it's also like not only that, but I do have compassion for human beings
Hmm.
and I want to prove to them
Yeah.
that I have compassion for them.
But he's
Um,
also he's also human in a way because he says, "Believe me, I don't want to do this, but I'm the only one that can pilot the ship." You remember
yeah,
that moment? That's a very humanistic moment where it's like I'm willing to. It's a very humanistic,
I'll
courageous
do it.
moment. I'll do it. I don't want to do it, but I'll do it. How many times have you fucking said that? You know, I don't want to do it,
Right.
but I'll do it. Um, and you fall in love with the character. You really. So when that tail goes through that chest, it's shocking. If you're not prepared for it, this is one of those situations that I'd love to be able to watch this movie again for the first time because I would love that moment that Bishop gets hit like that. And it's so ugly. It's so violent. I know it puts off some people, but I think it's beautifully done. The body rises up in the air, carried by that tail, and then the queen grabs it by both sides and just rips him in half. I don't know of anything that I've seen that's better looking than that. That's a great what should be a death scene. But
Yeah.
even through that, Bishop is still struggling to save the day because he saves Newt. When that air
Yeah.
shaft opens up and she starts flying across the floor, he grabs a hold of her. And it's I don't know of too many movies where you cheer the way you cheer in this movie, where you get excited and you're overwhelmed and you're completely sold out to the emotions, the fear, the tension. Um, it's perfect in that way, where Scott's film is a masterpiece of tension and what the hell is going to happen next. Cameron's film is its own masterpiece of war and action, and they're two completely different films.
Yeah,
Um,
and basic storytelling.
yeah.
Even though you say, well, it's obvious, and then you say
Hmm.
compared to the Rambo sequel, this is like miles and miles apart from that.
Yeah.
But Lance Hendrickson also like he has this toughness. His voice, he just seems rugged. So for him to be as soft as he is in this film is it's refreshing and it
Hmm.
makes you just like him that much more.
Well, if
And
you, yeah,
and the
definitely.
opening with the hand with the knife, where he quickly passes the knife between each the separation between the fingers against the top of the table, and then
Yeah.
it's like sped up. That's when you're like, what? And then and that's when Ripley's like, "What the fuck? Like, there's a fucking android on here."
Hmm.
And you have all of that. Now, talk about um, talk about Michael Bain, whatever his name is.
Michael Bean.
He's very like he's there, but he's also like underplayed in this film.
I think Bean does a really good job. I think, well, first of all, Bean came in at the last minute. Bean wasn't set to star in this film. You know that, right?
No, I don't know the details of that.
Originally, like Cameron somehow had the power to put these people through training with a real Marine vet. Ripley, Gorman, and Reiser didn't participate in this, but the troop, the crew, the Marines themselves came together for a 2 week period in the same way that Spielberg had the soldiers come together for Saving Private Ryan. So they were running drills, they were learning how to march, they were learning how to sound off, they were learning how to load weapons and shoot. All of that played into it. Originally, the character of Hicks was supposed to be played by James Remar, who was the scumbag, not the leader, but the scumbag leader in the Warriors. He had a friendship with Walter Hill, executive producer on this. The story was that there were creative differences, or not creative differences, but there was a loss, a death in his family. This is the story that was put out at the time. The truth was, and it came out years later, and Remar talked about it in a podcast that he did. He was fired from the film for he was busted for drug possession. I'm imagining cocaine. Like a dumbass in '86, this motherfucker flew to London with cocaine. Got busted.
Nice.
So he he was busted in. I don't know if he got busted for carrying cocaine over there or scoring cocaine over there, but he was replaced in the first week. Then they brought in Michael Bean. Gail Ann Hurd, they had just worked with him on Terminator, but they didn't want like a reunion of that, but they knew that he could do it, so they brought him in. He hadn't trained with those guys. He had auditioned for it. He had read the script. He had lobbied hard for the role of Hicks, but he didn't get it. Now Remar's out. They bring Michael Biehn in, and I think he did a great job of being, he is, you can read it on his face. I'm a soldier. I don't want to do this, but it's the thing that I'm good at. It's the thing that I know. It's the thing that I can do. And there's a world weariness there. It's like when they start talking about nuking the planet, and Reiser's like, no, Reiser says he can't do that. You can't do that. And Sigourney Weaver says this is a military operation. Corporal Hicks has say so, and you can hear it in his voice. Yeah, yeah, she's right. He doesn't want to make that decision. He has to make that decision, and he plays into it. And I think I haven't seen a lot of what Bean's done. I saw, there's obviously this film, The Abyss, Terminator. Um, I think he plays Johnny
Tombstone.
Ringo in Tombstone. Yeah,
Yeah,
he's
Johnny
usually,
Ringo. Yeah.
yeah, he's good, but I don't know what kind of personal problems that he had that didn't make him a bigger star. There's got to be something there because these are some of the biggest films of all time. It should have catapulted him into superstardom, and it didn't. Maybe he's a little bit too everyman. Maybe he's a little bit too regular at a time in films when you needed to be. The only regular guy that was going to be given that shot was Bruce Willis after Die Hard. Everything else was muscled up, oiled up, ridiculous kind of robotic men. Schwarzenegger, Stallone, those guys.
Yeah,
So
steroids.
steroid, yeah, it was the steroid period. So that's the story there. I think he plays that part, that caring person. That it's almost as if he is a good old boy, rah rah American, but one that you root for because he's not ridiculous. He's not. He's the everyman in that troop. He's capable.
Yeah,
He's good. Yeah.
He probably started out, rough, but he's just seen too much.
Yeah, he's broken at that point. Yeah.
And and
Worn
then
down, not broken, worn down. Yeah.
yeah, worn down. And Paul Reiser's, I, I don't want to just
You don't want to keep
limit
shitting
fucking
on.
Paul Reiser. No, I don't want to limit the what we discuss about Paul Reiser
Hmm.
to, he was cast in the role of treacherous Jew.
Yeah.
Uh, I think the way that he plays it it's really smart. He's always kind of like, he's always looking for the angle, and he's always like, no, look, like this is you almost can't like fault him
Yeah.
because he's justified it so well that you do fault him because he's willing to sacrifice everyone, including himself and the world, or worlds, possible worlds, to smuggle this some kind of specimen back. There are two face huggers in the lab that are alive in these tanks. He releases them, and obviously this is fucking 2 hours later. Spoiler alert, you know the drill. Um, he releases them while trapping the Ripley character and the Newt character in the lab so that they can become impregnated, and then he can smuggle them in. Um, Ripley suggests that he would have killed everyone else while they were in hypersleep. He wants this big fucking payday. He initially, the company doesn't believe Ripley when she says that her ship was attacked and that she had to destroy it in order to save herself.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, that's a little bit problematic in the storyline, I think, because you go to the original film, they knew it was there. They
so they
sent
wanted it.
they sent the Nostromo there. They wanted it. So why 57 years later did they wait to go back? That's a little bit of a I think that's a little bit of a inconsistency in the storytelling, but it's negligible, I guess.
And is this that 57-year factoid? Is that information, do we only get it from her dream? Remember, she has a nightmare.
Hmm.
Um, so at that point, if that's, I don't remember exactly if she only gets it, or if we as the audience only get that fact that it's 57 years through the nightmare, at which point the question is that even like accurate? Because whatever information we get from the nightmare,
Hmm.
we don't know what's true and what isn't because it's a nightmare for her.
I wondered that as
You know
well.
what I mean?
I wondered that as well, but I think the
And
57 years is
how
clear.
does she remain?
Yeah.
And how does she remain? Because they don't go into it that she would remain young after 57 years.
Well, I think there's something
Obviously, you
about
kind of
the
just buy into it.
well, yeah.
Yeah, you
There's
just
something
buy
about the
into it that
sleep
she's
hibernation. That
suspended.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's the science
Um,
fiction of science fiction. That's the science of science fiction.
right.
Yeah,
Well, that's the fiction of the
that's
science,
the fiction of the science fiction. There you go. Yeah.
and so yeah, so you have that aspect. But the fact is that whether even these company men at that point are even fucking in on that information, is kind of like in the beginning they're just like, well, you're the fucking reason why that thing was destroyed and it cost this much money, so what do you have to say about it?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so you really get a sense of who she is when she's like, fuck all of you. Um, you can take this job and shove it type of thing.
Yeah.
Sigourney paycheck, and um, she's tough. She's, as they say, she's a bad bitch.
Yeah.
Now I want to, before we wrap up, I have a couple things that I just wanted to get clarification. You
Hmm.
talked about forced perspective.
Yeah.
Define that.
Um, when you have something, obviously you can't always make something as large as it needs to be. So there are certain camera techniques, and I think it's part of the problem that Cameron didn't want to shoot in widescreen because of the problems that he faced when they were doing miniatures in Escape from New York, because he was a model builder on Carpenter's film. So
Oh, I didn't know that.
yeah, I mean Carpenter. James Cameron has a history. James Cameron is a journeyman filmmaker, writer, director, model worker, artist, sketch. What do you call it? Storyboards, all that shit.
Storyboard.
He could do all of that shit. He's very well versed in filmmaking, and he didn't want to shoot like that because he knew that the anamorphic would make it very difficult to get some of the shots. And they say that this is a very difficult film because it's a 70 when screened in 70 millimeter, it's very grainy, and I think it looks great. I think it's fucking great. Ridley Scott's film looks better, but this is a great film. This is a great looking film. Force perspective is basically, and I'm not sure about the order of this, but making something large, making a small object in the background much larger by bringing it closer and exaggerating its size. It looks like it's far away, but it's closer and so much bigger. And it's something, it has to, I'm not technically an expert at this, but it has to do with the lenses, the lighting, and the f-stops that you use in order to make something look bigger. And like one example, I don't know what this, part of the force perspective is the cryogenic sleep bays. They only had enough money for like 3 or 4, but if you make one, if you put the largest one in front and then make the other ones a little bit smaller, it makes it
Right.
look like it
I
goes
see what you're
farther.
saying. Yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean. And they
And
did
then is that's where the mirrors probably come in too, because you get this like
exactly,
enter the dragon thing.
exactly. So now it looks like hundreds, dozens, hundreds of cryogenic, and you narrow the set so that it kind of goes into a
Makes it look
triangular.
longer.
Yeah, it makes it longer and it makes it look. Billy Wilder did something very similar to that in the in the apartment where all these desks are set up, where he made smaller desks in the background so that it would force that perspective. Ridley Scott did something kind of similar. It's not the same, but it's a trick that he wanted the landing leg of the ship when they landed on LV 426. He wanted that to be much larger, so he made smaller suits and put his kids in them. So now that leg looks instead of Tom Skerritt walking, now a 6 foot tall Tom Skerritt, you have a 3.5 foot, 4 foot Ridley Scott's son standing next to that. It forces it. It makes it look so much larger than it actually is.
Right.
You know, so there's all kinds of tricks like that. Model building here, you make that ship larger than I mean, there's all kinds of tricks in this film. That that assault vehicle that Ripley drives, that she takes over, some of that is a real. It's some kind of a cargo ship that they used to pull 747s. They outfitted it so that it looked like a tank-like all-terrain vehicle like that. Um, but some of it is the actual vehicle, some of it is a model, and that's it's very difficult to see where the model work is in this film. Some of the rear projection, yeah, you can see the rear projection. That's easy to spot, but you dismiss it because it you've sold out to the story at that point.
Rear
Um,
projection means stuff that they're
so
showing
you
in the back that looks
well,
background.
basically, what you do is you put a screen up. You build a set in front of a screen, and then you project pre-shot footage. So when that
I
plane
see.
is crashing, that's that's a composite shot. That's not a composite shot. That's something that has been shot earlier that's put on that screen. Now you build explosions all around it, and you have the actors run out of frame on a real set. That's rear projection. That's they used to use it all the time when Hitchcock would have somebody driving. Everything in the background is rear projection. Robert Mitchum driving in A Lonely
Right.
Place. That's all rear projection.
That's like what Tarantino does
Hmm.
with in Pulp Fiction,
Yeah,
but he's doing it and you're aware of it.
he's very aware of it because he's
Yeah.
shooting color footage
Yeah.
with rear projection that's black and white. So it's even more self-conscious.
Yeah.
That's one of the
Pronounced.
few
Yeah.
things that I really do like about. But where he did that, I was like, oh, he's actually making a commentary. That's pretty cool. He's not just stealing something. That's actually pretty cool that he would do it that way. That's the
I
one
mean, even
moment that I give
his
him props.
even the stealing is a commentary,
Yeah,
though. I think.
exactly. Yeah.
But but and then you describe. We know. I know what you're talking about, and I think we get the idea. But when you say the first one is a 10 Little Indians,
Yeah.
explain.
10 Little Indians is a I think it's either a novel or a short story that Agatha Christie wrote where it's the game. And 10 Little Indians, as racist as that is, there's another version called 10 Little Niggers. And that's that's racism on a whole other fucking level. But it's 10
Right.
Little Indians, bump bump bump.
Clearly.
It's like what do you call it? Like 10 little monkeys on the bed. 9 monkeys jumping on the bed, one fell off, and now he's dead. 8 little monkeys jumping on the bed, one fell off, two fell off, and now there's seven. It's like so it goes down, but basically the 10 Little Indian story is that you're in a confined space, or you're in this area, and slowly this monster, this ghost, this spirit, is slowly killing off members of your team until there's only one left, the last girl, Ellen Ripley.
The final girl.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
final girl. The final girl is what they refer to it as. In this film, Ripley saves. Everybody comes together. Bishop survives. Newt survives. Hicks and Ripley until David Fincher gets his grubby little hands on it, and all kinds of controversy afterwards. But we'll get into that next week. Um,
Yeah.
but there is a sense of a happy ending here, and you're thrilled to see how this story plays out because you want Ripley to win. You want Ripley to conquer this beast and to know that she comes out of it on the other side. This woman has suffered. She has sacrificed and suffered and been ripped from her life. For her to beat this thing in the end like that, it's well earned. Maybe it's not realistic, but it's well earned, and you just love that. I mean, if you get a chance and you living in LA, they're going to show this movie at some point in a theater. I would recommend that you take Leslie to see it. In a theater, it's
Definitely.
phenomenal. It's just you will not it's one of those experiences where it's like this is what movie watching is. This is what it needs to be. This is an audience completely sold out to a character and a story and the adventure of it. And people screaming and laughing and covering their eyes, and that moment where your girlfriend just, you have you're bleeding from your forearm because she's just rammed her nails into you. All of that shit is worth
Yeah.
it. All of it is worth it in a film like this.
Yeah. I mean, like we watched this one. I don't know if she had seen it before. I don't
Hmm.
remember, but it's great to look over and either depending on what it is I'm showing her, where she's like, "Why are you showing me this?" or
Yeah,
um, things like that, and she's just like, or she's telling me she hates me or whatever, and
yeah.
and then and she's going like, "Oh fuck,"
Hmm.
and then it reminds me of the previous week when I'm watching something that I know is going to happen, and I'm like, oh fuck.
Yeah.
Um, and it's just like that's it's not only these deep revelatory kind of experiences that cinema snobs are interested in. Like it's also just the fucking popcorn.
Hmm.
Oh fuck,
Yeah.
moments and when you can have a mixture of both, something as visionary and artistic, but also well paced and well made as the
Hmm.
first one. But you can also have something that's well put together and really character driven, but also actor driven. I mean, an action driven also, as this one. You get kind of the best of everything. And so, what's cool is that they are different. They're different films. What were you
Yeah.
gonna say?
Well, I think that part of that is you can see Cameron's love for the first film and his respect for Ridley Scott. Um, I think there is a healthy and artistic uh, rev- uh,
Rivalry,
revelry for the original film, but there's still a
revelry,
sense
or
of
rivalry,
no,
or
not
both.
rivalry, reverence
Reverence.
for
Uh-huh.
the original film. But I think Cameron knows I have a story to tell. What he did was incredibly difficult because he's working off of somebody else's template. It has to be honest to his vision, but it also has to be within the parameters of what has been set up originally. And I think that's where Resurrection and the Alien versus Predator films fuck it up completely. But I got to go back to the fourth film. I'm a big fan of the third film, as problematic as it is, as conflicted and as compromised as that film is. I'm a big fan, and I'm looking forward to talking about that next week. But this is, for what it is, it's its own type of masterpiece. Not on the level of Ridley Scott's film, but masterpiece in its own handling of the material. I think it's an incredible film. I'm so glad that we got a chance to sit down and talk about it because this has been a great weekend for me.
Same,
Yeah.
same.
So where are we now, Mr. Chavez?
We are in the coffee drinking place. Um, if you like our shit, go to buymeacoffee.com/watchRickRamos. This particular episode goes out to someone who donated anonymously. Thank you very much. No coffee goes unnoticed. No good deed goes unpunished, motherfuckers. So we see it all happen. Um, it's crazy because we're in 2024. We've been doing this for a while. Um, my mustache was still black when I started recording with you. We've got watch this watchers all over the world. Um, I mean, in small numbers, those who are the survivors. But those of you in the United States, the UK, Germany, Australia, Canada, Slovenia, Hong Kong, Pakistan. There's one motherfucker in Pakistan.
Yeah.
You out there, Italy, Portugal, Mexico, Slovakia, Switzerland, Peru, the British Virgin Islands, Taiwan, Spain, Panama, Sweden, and beyond.
Yeah.
We're doing this for ourselves, but we're also doing this for you. Um, anyone who donates, we're gonna call you out. Every so often, we're gonna be doing episode requests for our highest and most consistent slash frequent donors. So we have request episodes in the works right now. Um, until then, we're gonna keep bringing you some of the best shit that we can. So as I say, buy a coffee, tell a friend, tune in, and watch this.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be back next week. Bye bye.